I am Amanda, founder of AGA. One of the most painful things that a family can go through, other than losing a child to death, is for that child to become an adult and then disown and estrange themselves from their parents, often with no justification. And then, as grandparents, we suffer the isolation from our grandchildren as well. For each of you in attendance, I am grateful that you have found us, and so very grateful that I, in turn, have found you. Discovering that you are not suffering alone, the devastating emotional trauma of alienation is huge. For the past 1.5 years since AGA's existence, those in attendance have learned so many significant things from the experts who present to our organization. When we hear them say something which we can personally identify with, a light bulb seems to go off in our minds, and a new piece of the puzzle comes together. If you take away with you even one piece of information from each one of our speakers, process it, and then apply it to your adult children and your grandchildren, eventually you will see a clearer picture. We may not be able to fix this right now, but we can educate ourselves to understand the many and varied dynamics involved in this complex reality of alienation. Understanding definitely does help us cope better. Grandparent alienation is considered by the experts to be a severe form of child abuse. And it is also considered elder abuse. So stop blaming yourselves for things you have not caused. If you did not cause this, you alone cannot fix this. It's a campaign of denigration and domestic violence against you. We can see that this situation affects people of all situations. It has no boundaries. Each of us is likely dealing with some of the following issues. Young adults who have personality disorders or unresolved childhood issues, be it a toxic daughter-in-law, son-in-law, son or daughter. That's right. It is important to realize that their spouse, your adult child, their spouse often takes on the personality of the alienating spouse and does absorb their anger. There are also enablers, pathological liars. There is quite often raging, jealousy, expectations, and entitlements of the me generation. I hope you realize how important it is to appreciate your spouse, your partner, and those who truly care about you and love you. What would we do without these people? Try to enjoy something special each day of your lives and never give up on our grandchildren. They would not want us to. I request after the meeting if you would go to the back of the room and take a survey questionnaire. AGA is conducting the first ever survey on grandparent alienation. If you Google around the world, you'll find no studies on grandparent alienation whatsoever. So we have put together over 50 questions, and actually it's also being edited by our board now. Eventually it'll be a little bit different. And Carol Golly, who is our court evaluator for alienation in the courts and therapist, and Dr. LaRufa, who's an adolescent medicine physician who is recovering from surgery, not here tonight, and also Dr. Singer will be working with the team to write a paper and publish a paper. Once we publish a paper, then we will really be on our way to be in national publications, etc.
I wanted to add my welcome to everyone, and especially our distinguished panel of religious leaders from the Naples, Florida area. Excuse me. We'll be hearing from each of them with insights on alienation from their professional experiences and perspectives, and perhaps their personal experience and perspective as well. Each panel member, after each panel member has spoken, we invite them to comment on what they have heard, and following that, we'll open the discussion to questions from the audience. It's my pleasure now to introduce the panel, and in no particular order. Dr. Ronald Patterson has been the senior minister of Naples United Church of Christ since 2003. Before arriving in Naples, he served congregations in New York and Ohio. A graduate of Heidelberg College, he completed his ministerial training at Andover Newton Theological School and a doctorate at Eden Seminary. He earned an MBA at Dowling College on Long Island, where he was an adjunct associate professor of humanities. While most of his professional career has been spent as senior minister of large congregations, he was an associate minister on the staff of Marble Collegiate Church in New York City from 1996 until 2003. In Naples, he served as chair of the Coalition of Progressive Religious Voices and is currently active in the Rotary Club of Naples. He represents Florida on the Executive Council of the United Church of Christ. He currently serves on the board of Planned Parenthood of Collier County. His spouse, Charnley, recently retired from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. Together they have 4 children and 4 grandchildren. Rabbi Adam Miller is the rabbi of Temple Shalom of Naples. Ordained in 2003, Rabbi Miller previously served congregations in Chappaqua, New York, and Framingham, Massachusetts. In addition to his work meeting the spiritual and pastoral needs of the congregation, Rabbi Miller is active in the greater community. He currently serves on the board at the Jewish Federation of Collier County, the Advisory Council of the Holocaust Museum and Education Center of Southwest Florida, the local board of Jewish National Fund, and is a member of the Rotary Club of Naples. Rabbi Miller participates in 2 national organizations focused on the work of social justice, the Central Conference of American Rabbis Committee on Justice, Peace, and Religious Liberties, as well as the Commission on Social Action of Reform Judaism. Born in Watertown, Wisconsin, Rabbi Miller spent his youth living in Detroit, Atlanta, Buffalo, and Tulsa. He is a graduate of the University of Kansas and the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. Rabbi Miller lives in Naples with his wife Jennifer Siegel Miller, an attorney specializing in family law and child protective law. They are blessed with twin sons, Jonah and Gabriel. Pastor Stephen Wigdahl has served nearly 14 years as senior pastor of Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Naples. Currently, Emmanuel Lutheran is expanding its ministry to a second 25-acre site to the northeast on Oil Well Road near Collier County Fairgrounds. Prior to arriving in Naples, Pastor Wigdahl served 15 years at Ascension Lutheran Church in Ogden, Utah. An Iowa native, he graduated from Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, and in 1975 with a double major in speech, theater, and religion. Following college, he went on to Brown Institute School of Broadcasting in the Twin Cities and worked in radio and television for 5 years. He attended Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, and graduated in 1984. Pastor Steve Hayes is on staff at the First Baptist Church of Naples, where he has served as an associate pastor for the past 7.5 years. He presently serves as the minister of biblical counseling. Pastor Hayes grew up in Alabama near Birmingham, where he attended Samford University, a Baptist college, to prepare for the ministry. After graduating from Samford with Bachelor of Arts in Religion, he received a Master's of Divinity degree from Southwestern Theological Seminary in Texas, where he also received a Master's in Social Work at the University of Texas at Arlington. Since being ordained into the ministry in 1984, Pastor Hayes has spent nearly 30 years ministering in churches in Texas, Tennessee, and Florida. He's been married 26 years and has 3 children, 21, 19, and 15, along with a daughter-in-law, 1 grandchild, and 1 on the way. He loves living in Naples. Deacon Forrest Wallace is the permanent deacon of St. John the Evangelist Catholic Church, where we are. Prior to this, he was Director of Public Relations and Marketing at Ave Maria University and Parish Deacon at Ave Maria Oratory Parish. He has also worked in the Diocese of Fall River, Massachusetts, New Orleans, Louisiana, and Cincinnati, Ohio. He attended Thomas More College, Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis, and Fairleigh Dickinson University. Deacon Wallace is a board member of the Multiple Sclerosis Center of Southwest Florida. He is married and has 8 children.
So far. First of all, I want to thank you for the privilege of being here and for the invitation. Basically, I want to start by saying I'm here to learn because I sense that in this room there's a great deal of pain and a great deal of hurt. And I think anyone who's in the religious life or who serves more than 10 minutes in a parish setting realizes that the proper attitude when in the presence of pain is awe and empathy and an attempt at understanding. I think everybody is involved in the conflict-related alienation. I think in every single one of our families, if we look back more than a generation or two, we will see situations of awe, situations of deep alienation and anger that's resulted from that alienation. I don't want to labor the obvious too much because I've got 4 wonderful colleagues up here, but one of the stories I thought about when I was thinking about what I wanted to share tonight was that incredibly powerful Buddhist story about the person you carry on your back and the pain of carrying all of the unresolved things in our lives. It is not easy to lay those burdens down, but as we carry that pain, it festers within us and it can hurt us so deeply. And I'm reminded of another thing which I believe is very true in my own life, although I manage to ignore it most every day. There's only one attitude in the world that I can change, and that's my own. I can pray for your attitude. I can pray for your pain, but I can only change my attitude myself. So I'll react to your questions and comments. Steve.
It's good to see Ron.
Yeah.
We're colleagues and we seem to pass like ships in the night. I don't know when I saw you last. I want to echo what Ron just said moments ago because I'm here to learn too. I have noticed I've been a pastor approaching 30 years and every day I'm on a learning curve. I want to tell you when I began the ministry, even as a student pastor back in around 1982, and you all might have something similar to this, but when you walk into a hospital for the first time with clerical garb on, and in my case walked into a room where a man was in terrible pain and traction. I don't know, he'd had some kind of automobile accident, I think. And I wasn't much of a listener, Ron. I was just there with an agenda, and that was to get in there and make sure I did everything they told me to do when I went to a hospital. Make sure I say some words of comfort and make sure I say a prayer before I leave. Well, by the time I got to that point, I obviously was not understanding this man at all, and I made the mistake of saying to him, I'd like to pray for you because I understand exactly what's going on with you. He looked at me, and I'm not going to use the exact quote, but he said, "You SOB, get out of this room as fast as you can and don't ever show up in my life again." What I learned rather quickly, I didn't realize I had hubris, pride as much as just total inexperience, to the point that to this day I have never looked at anybody and said to them, I understand exactly how you feel. I use a little different image, and part of that is because in my life, when I've gone through pain, I've realized that as many people have talked to me about it, I can't say that I know of anybody that knows exactly how I feel. So I use something more like the image of, with experiences that we all go through, that we can kind of come and parallel park alongside people, but we can't necessarily believe that we're in the same circumstance. So everybody, as uniquely as we have all been created by God, we all our experiences have a uniqueness to them, and I always try to honor that. I jotted so many things down today. I want to begin to talk about all this, but I will tell you that one of the spiritual sources for me through the years, and I'm sure for a lot of these people up here, when you go to the Scripture, is to find what are called the laments. The gift of being able to lament. Did any of you ever see that? It's still in the cartoons. I mean, my father showed it to me a lot. The Family Circus years ago. This one about this little family, and even if you look at it now, you find out the kids have never grown up after 25 years. But there was a cartoon one day where this little boy was down praying, and his sister came in and said, "Jeffy, you're only on one knee, so only half of your prayers count." Well, with that image, I realized that in my life sometimes, I always prayed with one knee down, and that was trying to pray the things that I thought were good and acceptable in God's sight. It's like saying everything you want another person to, what they would expect you to say out of honor or respect, but to get into a relationship with God that you even begin to question and have anger, like Jeremiah the prophet, who says, "Cursed be the day I was born." When you get into those kind of laments and that kind of darkness and that even the different stages of grief, from denial, anger, bargaining, depression, etc., that brings out a whole different side of who you are sometimes. And what I realized when it happened in my life, that initially I was kind of afraid of it, to be honest about it, and to not only to talk to other people about it, but to even talk to God about it. So I've had a real about face in my life and in my ministry in the past several years, because even people who know me in my parish right now, I've been involved in some major lament in my own life in the last 3 years, and it always takes me back to the point that when I'm with people like you, who are in your own midst of suffering, that first of all we have to be able to admit it, and we have to be able to wrestle with it. We need to find people to come alongside us. There are certain things you might try to do alone, but coming through the valley of the shadow of death is not one. And thanks be to God for communities. At Emmanuel Lutheran right now, we have an example would be AA groups that meet there Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We've got groups that meet for sexual addiction. We have groups that meet for gambling addictions. And every time I go and begin to hang around these folks that come, I see myself in them, is one thing. But I'll give you an example. At the AA groups, I came back to my staff one day and I said, that was one of the most deep religious experiences I've had in a long time, because these people are able to be very honest and open about what's going on in their lives. And when you can at least start there, and you can allow other people to come alongside and experience what becomes God's gift of community. It was St. Paul who said, we rejoice together, we suffer together. And when you're a body of Christ, in the case of my tradition, that means that the healing comes. The healing comes, I think, many times through a community like this that is able to walk together and be together. And as Ron said moments ago, I certainly don't understand all the stories and the dynamics of it. There are some. I'll pass the mic on here. I will tell you that one of the things I came across in the early years of my ministry was a statement that was something to this effect: God has a way of drawing straight lines with crooked paths. All right. I've kind of thought that through, because because the reason I get hope from that is because it starts out with the subject, God is able to do. God is able. And for those of us who hang around Scripture, we found out that God is able to do things that we as human beings can't do. That even has to do with changing hearts and lives. And when you look at the situation in your life tonight, and some that I've been through that I think are absolutely impossible for any kind of resolve, the surprise is many times, and we realize the timetable is kind of interesting. We call it Kairos, or God's time, that we still can maintain hope because we believe that, as I say, God can draw straight lines out of crooked paths and bring us into places where I look at you folks tonight and hope and pray, like I just heard moments ago, that some door of hope will open for you in the broken relationships that you're experiencing, so that once again, the joy of the morning will be yours. And that sometimes means that we have to admit a little bit about ourselves and recognize some things about others as well. So I will pass it on, but again, I'm here to learn tonight with you, and if anything, I am encouraged by knowing that people like you get together to find hope together.
Okay, I'm going to stand up because I can't see anybody on this side of the room. I wasn't tall enough in my chair. I want to welcome you all to St. John. Thank you, Rabbi. This is a very interesting challenge that you're handling. One that's personal, one that attacks your heart, that attacks your mind. And I only say this because I think I understand. I've dealt with a similar situation with one of my kids. When you have 8 children, you have 8 chances to win, and you have 8 chances to lose, too. So, but with all of them, we're winners, because as long as your child knows that you love them, you win, and your child wins. As long as your grandchild knows that you love them, they win, and so do you. It's important. I went through this with an abusive boyfriend with one of my daughters, and we eyeballed this behavior and said, wow, this guy came in, he was so charming, he was doing all kinds of stuff for the family, I see heads nodding now, and then all of a sudden, she hates us. Why? This is a pattern of abuse that's clinical, that's identified. In fact, I sent an email to Amanda. There's a book called Why Does He Do This? It's by Lundy Bancroft. Excellent book, and it takes you through the stages, and it helps you understand how you can never give up. Because your child will continue to be persuaded until something happens in their life that will flip the switch. Thanks be to God, it happened with my girl, but it took an awfully long time. Now I have a 5th grandchild on the way, so that's 8 kids, almost 5 grandchildren. And this has consumed us as a family. So I understand how this is going to affect you in some way, the way that I might be able to. And so I'm going to talk to you from a Catholic perspective. From a Catholic perspective, stay close to the church. From a Catholic perspective, access the sacraments. the sacrament of reconciliation. Now, you'll see tonight that among us all here, more joins us together than divides us, but there are some things that in our separate traditions are specific. And as a Catholic, from that perspective, the sacraments will help you. Lean on the church. In all of our cases, lean on your community. Lean on the friends that you can trust. And identify who those friends are who you can trust. Because truth will out. In all cases, the truth will out. And so you have to rely on the truth to set you free, and to set your child free, and to set your grandchild free, so that before it's too late, but it will never be too late for a grandchild to come back to you, for a child to come back to you. And I've had instances with friends where it was very late in someone's life when the watershed happened. But it will happen. Pray for that. Pray for the truth to come out for you. Because if your child is targeted by someone, that's not your fault. That's not their fault. That is a sickness on the part of the person who's targeting them. Pray for that person. The hardest thing my wife made me do was pray for this person. I thought, are you kidding me? Okay, I'm a deacon. I'm the lowerarchy of the church. Right? We're the lowest level of the church, and we come in to serve only. I don't want to be a priest. I have a life of other things that I have to do. But the spiritual life and the professional counseling that you can access, and those are two important things. Access the spiritual life that you have with a spouse if you're married, with your church, with your spiritual community, wherever that is, and access professional help, because that's so important. It will help you grasp reality, because acknowledging and understanding and grasping really what's happening took me an awfully long time in that just one instance. So I have 7 other chances to have, this kind of fun. I'm not looking forward to it, but I'm looking forward to every day now. And I looked forward to every day when things weren't good, because I knew that I was seeking the truth, and the truth did set me free. And I know it will for you as well. So thank you for being here. Welcome to St. John. Rabbi?
Thank you, and thank you to the singers and to Amanda for bringing me here and taking the time to meet with me over the last year and share with me your stories, share with me what this group has meant to so many who are here as an outlet, as a place to go to find that sense of community, to find the kind of hope that you get at meetings where you learn that your story is not alone, that there are others who, I love the image of you can only park next to each other, you can't actually occupy each other's spots in life, but you can be in the same parking lot and understand what's going on around you. And knowing that you're not just there, one car all alone in an empty lot, but that there are others, is a comforting feeling, I know, and one that you can draw strength both from stories of hope as well as from just being with each other. I find it funny that so many on the panel have already said they're here to learn. You'd think as the youngest here by far, I'd be the one who could get away with saying, I'm here to learn and understand. You mentioned 1982, that was 2nd grade. So I think in some ways I bring to this panel both a different perspective as Jewish, as a rabbi, as well as from an age perspective, but I don't think that's a bad thing, because I'm sure that I have a sense that many of the situations that have been described to me and that are probably out there are ones that involve my peers, those who are in my age demographic. Yes. So it's interesting for me to be a part of this panel with that in mind. When I was preparing for this evening, I was trying to think about what is it you're going through, not from an understanding point, but just bigger picture. And what came to my mind was that it's a loss. So often we think only of a process of grieving when we lose someone to death, when that person is no longer in the world. But in the same way that I encourage people to grieve when they've lost a job, to grieve when they've lost something significant from their lives, this is truly a loss. And one that you need to really experience those different stages of grieving, which you actually alluded to, interestingly enough, earlier. And in Judaism, there's a tradition that when it comes to a loss, the first few periods are very intense. You might have heard that the first 7 days are known as Shiva, which refers to Shiva 7, the first 7 days of mourning. But there's actually a tradition that when you go to the house of someone who is in that period of Shiva, the rabbis teach that you should not be the one to initiate the conversation with those who have lost. Rather, you're told very clearly, go into the home, sit and listen, and wait for them to speak to you first. And there's something very powerful in that. Understanding, and I think it goes back to the pastoral care element, that none of us knows exactly where someone else is. Who are we to put ourselves in their shoes, and who are we to know what to say to them in that moment until that person reveals to us where they are and opens us up and gives us an opportunity to be there for them. And for me at least, I came here tonight primarily in that mode. I don't want to speak too much in the beginning. I want to be able to listen, to hear your questions, to give a perspective, and to understand and appreciate that you've suffered a great loss. Some more recent than others, yet all of them are wounds that you carry in your hearts. And our role as clergy is to be silent, to listen, to take it in, and to be able to be there for you. I also was just, as I was listening to the list of the different steps in the mission, the different pieces of the organization, I was struck by the desire to not just stay where you are, but with the hope of finding strategies for addressing what's there, for creating moments of unification. And I would share with you that in Judaism, one of the powerful traditions we have is that when somebody has caused you pain, when someone has wronged you, you actually have the opportunity to go to them 3 times and forgive them for what they've done, or allow them to come to you 3 times and ask for forgiveness. And if after 3 times of being genuine, of being present and really opening up, that person still does not respond, it's a burden on them because you've made an effort. But that doesn't mean you should give up. But there's an understanding that you can only do so much. You have to care for yourself, but you have to continue to be there. And I'll leave you with one last story before I pass the microphone. The sages tell the story of a queen who was struggling with one of her daughters, and the two of them got into a heated argument one day in the throne room, after which the princess announced she was leaving, never to come back. And the queen said, "That's fine, you're expelled from my kingdom." Many, many years later, a poor beggar comes into the courtroom to seek the queen's favor. When the beggar finally stands before the queen, she says, "Mother, it's me." She was completely unrecognizable in the layers of dirt, in the way that she had changed and what had happened to her in life. And yet at the moment she spoke and said, "Mother," instantly the queen recognized her own flesh and blood, recognized her daughter, stepped off the throne, and embraced her. Whatever had happened in the past was allowed to be forgotten, forgiven, and the two of them were able to start anew with each other. Now, interestingly, the rabbis share this story in the context of this is how God views us as human beings. That while we sometimes struggle with God and say, enough, we're leaving, we're going away, whenever we are ready to come back to the divine, God will be there to embrace us and welcome us back. But I think actually the more literal reading is what's fitting for us. That as long as you remain there, as long as you have hope that someday they'll come back, someday you'll be able to reconcile. When that day comes, you'll be able to do so with an open heart. You'll be able to welcome them back. And you'll have that same moment of hugging, of love, and of renewal. May you each experience that in your lives.
Let me go this way because I can't see the back row either. I'm vertically challenged, so I do better when I stand up. And Pastor Patterson talked about being in awe. I have a master's of divinity degree, and then I went and got a master's in social work degree. I didn't do that because I was smart or I loved school. I did that because after I got out of seminary, I was in the ministry. I realized that that couple of token counseling classes that I had in my curriculum was not going to cut it. After I sat across the room a few times, I was like, oh, this is hard. So I says, I've got to get tools. So I went back to school, and it's been very, very beneficial. One of the places of support and comfort for me is the Scriptures. And so when I began to think about sharing, I immediately just went to the Scriptures and began to read them a little differently with the theme of alienation and estrangement in mind. And if you have the green handout, this is one that I wrote up for you. I'm not even through the first half of the first book of the Bible, and it is full of estrangement and alienation. I had never thought about this before. Like in chapters 3 and 4, you have the resentment and the tension between Adam and Eve with the fall. But then I thought about, many of us know the story of Cain and Abel, where Cain killed Abel. And I've always thought about what it was like to grieve over Abel. And then as I was reading it, and I thought about the fact that Cain was then exiled because of committing murder, that Eve lost both her boys, not just one.
Yeah.
And that had never clicked with me until I began to look at this. And then there's the story of Abraham with Sarah, who was his wife, who was barren. And a Middle Eastern tradition in that day, if a woman was barren, she could give her handmaid to her husband, and she would conceive, and that would be their heir. That's kind of like their adoption. And then the Lord allowed Sarah to receive, and then there was tension between them. And then, and because of that tension, Hagar and Ishmael were sent away. And so you have Abraham losing Ishmael. And then you have also the tension between Isaac and Ishmael. And then you get to Isaac and Rebekah, and there's a whole case study right there with Isaac and Rebekah. You have Isaac and Rebekah playing favorites between their two sons, Esau and Jacob. Then you have tension between Esau and Jacob when Jacob manipulates Esau into impulsively selling his birthright for a bowl of soup. But then many of us can relate to this one. The erosion of Esau's relationship with his parents begins when he goes against tradition of marrying among the extended family, and he marries two local Hittite wives. The Scripture says that they made Isaac and Rebekah's life bitter. And then there's total family estrangement that occurs when Rebekah coaches Jacob to deceive his aging and blinding father into believing he is Esau in order to steal Esau's spiritual blessing as the firstborn. Jacob is sent away and exiled to his uncle's family so Esau won't kill him, and so that he won't marry wives from the locals as Esau did. Then Esau, knowing how disapproving his parents were of his two Hittite wives, deepens the estrangement by choosing a third wife from among the daughters of Ishmael, Isaac's estranged half-brother. It just gets more and more complicated, and we're just in chapter 25 or 28 of the Bible.
It gets worse.
Yeah, and it just multiplies. But the Scripture is full of dysfunctional families and strained relationships between siblings, between parents and children. It's part of the fallen human condition. But the Bible is also full of the grace and mercy of God as well. And it's full of redemption and rebuilding and restoring. But we also have to understand that according to the Scriptures, it will only get worse as we race toward end times and society drifts further and further away from God. And I think part of this too is because, with distance, it's easier for us to get alienated. Because you think about it, when we were in small communities and a child alienated their grandparents, then you had a whole community that could come up and kind of slap them upside the head and say, "What are you doing?" Mm-hmm. And you don't have that anymore because, they're not just down the street or across town. They're in another state or they're, in a different country. And so you don't have that community, that accountability that communities once had. And then I think also with technology, you talked about the younger generation. I was watching a sitcom where they were making a joke about the fact that there was a couple and they were standing face to face, but they were arguing with texting. And one was going, and the other went, oh, ba, 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 ba. And the other went, well, ba, 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 ba. They're 3 inches from each other, and they're sitting here having a texting war. And, which with that, our ability to manage relationships gets diminished because it's done over Facebook. And I'm amazed when I see the younger generation pour out their drama on Facebook for the whole world to see.
Yeah.
And it's like their court of public opinion. And since I'm not from that generation, it just amazes me. I can't believe they put that on there. 2 Timothy 3:1-4 sounds a lot like what you were reading earlier. Listen to this list. But understand this, that in the last days there will become times of difficulty. For people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. So how do you prevent alienation and estrangement as society drifts, in this direction? From a personal experience, I'd like to say, as a child, I witnessed my sisters were products of the 60s and the 70s. And I was 7 years younger than my youngest sister. And then my older sister was 11 years older. And they were products of they hit their teens, in the late 60s and the early 70s. And I had one, and I watched them deal with those issues as culture impacted our family, as my sisters made poor choices. And I saw the tension between my parents, and I saw the tension between my sister and my parents. And I remember one day, I never forgot this, and I don't know how old I was, but I remember after one of these events, my dad, who was kind of an Archie Bunker kind of guy, wasn't good at showing his feelings, that kind of thing, was sitting in his chair, kind of hiding behind his paper, dealing with his pain. And I don't know, I was probably 8 years old, maybe 10. And I was walking through the living room, and I could see his face over the paper. And there was tears just in the rim of his eye. And I never forgot that picture of that pain that couldn't be expressed. My older sister was alienated from her oldest daughter and grandchild because of an abusive, controlling son-in-law, which also cut my parents off from their grandchild and their great-grandchildren. And as I mentioned earlier, I now have a daughter and a grandchild myself. I mean, a daughter-in-law and a grandchild myself. And we've had a few patches where I've realized how the potential for alienation can develop in an instant, in spite of your best intentions. Mm-hmm. And it's a scary thing when you realize everything that is at stake. So I can relate to that. I put down here just a few things that I try to share with people. They're just principles. When you find yourself in this situation, just try to make sure that you nurture and protect your original relationship, your marriage. Keep you and your husband, your spouse, if you're still married and both alive and you're there to be a team, keep a united front and make sure that you stay a team. That's crucial. Be honest with yourselves and God about your own sabotaging or contributing behaviors, but at the same time beware of false guilt. The Scripture calls Satan the accuser of the brethren, who accuses them day and night. And he will love for you to wallow in self-pity and accusations that are not your responsibility, that you can't solve. It has been said that when children succeed, parents take too much of the credit. And when our children fail, we take too much of the blame. Ask God for wisdom on how to understand your adult children and their spouses and what their spouses can tolerate. Usually less is more. It's very difficult when counseling is what you do. And you watch how your son and your daughter-in-law and so forth, you see all the dysfunctional traits, that they're going to have to hammer out. And you know what? It's none of my business. Unless they ask for the counsel, and unless it is welcome, I don't give it. I just go to the Lord and pray about it. But we're tempted sometimes when we do get alienated and we have those problems to do monster emails or to try to convince. And I found that sometimes if you're not careful, it just makes the wall higher and stronger. And plus, the more information you give them, the more ammunition you give them to twist and distort and to use against you. So usually less is more. Demonstrate self-control and spirit control over your emotions and your speech. One who controls their spirit is better than the mighty in Proverbs. And also, a gentle answer turns away wrath. Keep your circle of involvement as small as possible. Resist the urge to have family members choose sides. Keep children out of the middle. And be careful how you defend yourself when you feel misrepresented or attacked. Usually, once again, there too, less is more. I'm sorry you feel that way, but that's not the way things are. You move on rather than get sucked into the vortex. Try to have a process of mediation if it's possible that moves through many stages from simple to more complex. I realize sometimes when nothing else is available, you may have to use a legal route, but that should be a last resort. But the Bible does say to be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. So it is wise to educate yourself as to what your options are and what you can and can't do. You may not use it, but it's good to know it. And take the high and humble road, enduring injustice while trusting God and leaving Him room to work. In Romans 12 it says, as far as it is with you, live at peace with all men. So I may not have peace with someone, but as the rabbi was sharing, I have to do my best to know as far as it is with me, I've done my best to live at peace. And then lastly, just as hope, as was shared with the testimony over here, children are smart, and they figure things out as they get older. And if you take the high road and you keep your side of the street clean and crisp, they'll see who's being manipulative and who's being controlling and who is destructive. And God will reveal the truth in time.
First of all, this has been excellent.
Yes.
I've been attending meetings for over a year. I was involved with the board of directors with AGA during the first year, during 2012. And all the meetings we attended were, there were speakers, mostly doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and whatever, all who were learning, believe it or not, because AGA is new.
Yeah.
This is the first, the only really organization of its kind in the world, and we are starting to expand. So even though it goes back to biblical times, there was no AGA chapter back when Cain and Abel went through their turmoil. And of course, we needed another side to this. In other words, let's get away from the clinical and talk about the religious aspects. Because after the experience that my wife and I went through with alienation, for the first months it was brutal. And believe it or not, because things were changing in the world in general, in society in general, and things were getting more meaner and vicious. There was an opportunity really to turn to a more spiritual way, and I'm Jewish. I'm not a largely practicing Jew, but I found myself praying more. I found that it was an outlet other than just textbook methods to get through this. And quite frankly, this is why at the board meetings we had this discussion, to get something of this nature out into the open. And quite frankly, I thought the talks were excellent. I've been watching the series The Bible on television, and it's been really very, very interesting and informative. I'm learning a lot. And some of the things that Pastor Hayes was discussing were brought out in some of the first couple of chapters. But I thought that the discussion was excellent, and people should know that they need to concentrate on the positives in their life. Even though this is a difficult time, it's important not to dwell on all of the negatives, but think about the positives. And the spiritual part of it is a big part of it. It can be. So I just wanted to tell you how I personally appreciated everything that was discussed here tonight. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I've had the opportunity to attend all of the meetings and to listen to all of those people who offer us a piece of the puzzle from every direction, every venue. As you see, knowing helps coping. But I think everybody here just resorts to, because we can't fix it. We try. We are the grandparents who love. We're not the mean mother-in-law or father-in-law. We're the ones who love. In my case, I was able to do that for many years until I was outed, as were the other members of our family too. I think we all now resort to just praying. So understand how important you are and how important this part is to us, because when you get it, I've become an expert on this. Because you see this book here, these are about 1,000 people from across the world, 30 states, 5 countries that communicate with me. And so many of them praying and telling their sad stories, but please understand what we want from you is understand that if we can't fix it, and we've learned to must keep communicating, we must try. Some can't. It's impossible for them to, they want to. But if I understand the psychology of it now, even on the board in the back there, I put the experts, the international experts notes, and I've sent it to you. Even knowing that, it doesn't fix it, it helps me, having these people help me, but you have to understand, I just resort to praying. Every day when I swim, I talk to my grandchildren. That's when I do it. And I pray for them, and I pray to God that we will be reunited. And that's what we need from you. Just help us understand that we can keep doing that.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Amanda just brought something up, and I don't know how to phrase this properly, but I would love if every clergyman would be able to have some kind of a sermon in his own church or synagogue aimed at the people who would be our children's age, and speak to them about marriage and children and respect for their parents, their elder parents like us, and just to try to maintain that in your marriage and how important it is. I mean, I had a mother-in-law, and I can say this in front of Jerry, a mother-in-law who was very, very difficult, but I still would say to him, call your mother, you know? Call your mother.
What did you want me to call her?
And even if it was just once every 2 weeks, I'd say, call your mother, and then you get aggravated, and I say, please lower your blood pressure, you know? But this is something that has come to me, again, once before I thought about this when I went to a meeting, but that would be appreciated. Baby steps.
That's an idea. That's a wonderful idea. Yeah, that's an idea. Excellent idea.
You know, one of the great stories in the New Testament is the story of the prodigal child.
Yeah.
And I think most of you probably know that story. And I've had a long relationship, since I guess I'm the senior guy on this panel, with that story. And I preached any number of bad sermons on that text, because looking back on those sermons, I realize now that I didn't see the ambiguity in that story. I didn't realize that the older son had a right to be angry, perhaps,
Yes.
and that the father was probably too good to be true. But a couple weeks ago, since I don't get to hear too much good preaching, I was up in Cleveland at a meeting, and my spouse and I went to church. And the pastor that day, a woman, just before the sermon, we couldn't figure out what was happening. She took off her robe, and there was a little table set up on the chancel with 2 coffee cups and 2 chairs. And she went over, and after the scripture, which was the story of the prodigal child, she picked up one of the coffee cups and began a monologue as if she was seeing a long-lost friend and telling her the story of her daughter's descent into a totally wasted life, and how the daughter had come back from a life of prostitution in Las Vegas. And of course it was all a story, and it was a drama, and this woman was a wonderful actor. And as we watched, what we heard unfolding was a traditional story of how the father was so forgiving and how the older brother was so resentful. But the thing that grabbed my heart, it made me realize that I'd gotten the story wrong for so long, was the absolute ambiguity of this woman. She was madder than heck at her daughter. I should say hell, because it was. She was so angry at her daughter for her misbehavior and her lack of love and respect. And she was mad at her husband because of his forgiveness, even though she said, my husband is behaving like God, like I know God behaves toward us. And those listening that day were left with the struggle of the ambiguity. And so when I hear you talk, there's so much ambiguity about these things. We love them, and we love our kids, and yet they can make us madder than the dickens and hurt us deeper than anything possible. One of my colleagues said once that we're only as happy as our unhappiest child. So think about it. Steve.
I just wanted to pick up on the notion of narrative. In our congregation recently, we've talked about some of the loss of narrative. Let me be more specific. That when Ron talks about the prodigal child story, the prodigal son, however you want to call that, do I say the younger generation now? I guess I do. When I look at, certainly I'm 59, so I can go back, and what I want to say is that a lot of people, even in a generation younger than mine, don't even know the narrative anymore. They don't know the stories. There is a lot of what I've heard in terms of our culture of a more illiteracy around narratives from the Hebrew Scriptures, New Testament, what have you. And alongside that is within our own family some loss of narratives. What I mean by that was when I was a young boy in my family, when I look back the geographical arrangement of the family, where everybody seemed to live within 30 miles, we had family reunions all the time. And I remember in those family reunions, all the narratives and stories, in my case, what it meant to be a wig doll. And then there was the disappearance of the reunions, and it had to do with the way my mother said in the 1960s, early 1970s, all my sons and daughters were cast to different parts of the country, spread like seeds to the wind, you know. And with that, it was just the way it was. It was just the way it was, and it's happened throughout the culture. So now, not only have we kind of lost some of the narrative of the Holy Scriptures for many, but we've even lost the narratives of our own families. So there's a lot to come back to. I mean, there's a lot to come back to in terms of rediscovering the marvelous biblical narratives, but also maybe, and there has to be some intent to that. I mean, I right now, I have, my 4 sons live 2,500 miles from here. And so seeing them is like once or twice a year, and as you said before, Skype and all that just doesn't take the place of that, putting your arm around your kids and so on. So there's a lot of challenge there for all of us, and I think that whoever said it, there is something about it's a rather recent phenomena in terms of from the 60s on or something, that we've lost some of this.
I think the relational component is where some of those narratives have been lost. It's interesting. You could go to the Scriptures. You can even go to modern philosophy. You go to someone like Martin Buber and I-thou philosophy. For those who don't know, it's the idea that when you interact with people, there's 2 levels of interaction. There's I-it, which is when you walk into the dry cleaners. You walk in, your goal is to basically find out how much you owe them and get your clothing back. And there's I-thou, which is a really deeper sense of relationship where you go in and you're there to be present with someone, not just to talk about the news, sports, and weather, but to really hear their narrative. I like that word, but to really know what's going on with them. Where are they at? And I feel like as families have moved further apart, and you heard my story. I lived all across the country. We moved all apart. We were very separate from other family members, and I didn't get the bigger family narrative. I never got the family reunions, but I also sense. I'll speak as the younger generation. When I speak to my parents only on the phone or occasionally by Skype, it's not a deep conversation. Yeah. It's very much, they share with me what's going on with them. My mom's still working. She tells me about her work. She tells me about the things that are agitating her. My dad tells me about golf or not being able to golf because they live in Ohio and it's winter there right now and how jealous he is of me. But we rarely get to very deep, meaningful conversations, the kind that you didn't intend to get to them in other generations, but because you were interacting so often, you are part of the fabric of everyone's life. And so you had those deeper connections. You said you had a community around you that when there was an estrangement, you still knew what was going on with each other. There was a community structure around you. And it's much more difficult today. You alluded to the challenge of technology. It's not just that there are some who put their whole lives out there in technology. That's a whole issue in itself. But it's also the fact that technology is toneless. When you send an email, even with the best of intents, when you send a text message, how much more so, there's no voice there. There's no tone behind it. It's just words. And those are read by the receiver in however they imagine you are speaking them. So if you catch them at a bad moment, if you use a word that they weren't expecting, if you turn a phrase in a way that sets them on edge, what was intended to be a very friendly, hey, how's your day going, becomes, what do you mean how's my day going? You know today is my biggest day of my week. I have X, Y, and Z happening. How insensitive of you to do this. And what was intended to be a door to open becomes a wall, becomes something that creates another barrier. And what I see happen, and I see this both from my congregants who are of a grandparent generation as well as from my peers, is that the more the walls get built or grow, the more the relationships and the conversations withdraw. So they become even more surface conversations, to the point that you don't know what's going on in each other's lives, to the point that you keep increasing the risk of, whether intended to or not, of causing damage to the relationship. And I think, I know in my own work as a rabbi, my own rabbinate, I'm becoming much more sensitized to the importance of relationships within my congregation. I think it extends to our families as well. That part of the work that has to happen is being sensitive to the relationships that are there and investing the time and energy, no matter how far away we are from each other, to maintain those relationships as strong as we can and to grow them. And does it change the relationships that have already been damaged? No. But I think remaining open to those rebuilding, not adding to the wall, finding ways, using things like the phone instead of just sending an email, are steps we can take towards trying to take down the walls, trying to be open to each other, and trying to have those present experiences rather than creating the gaps that separate us.
One of the things I think that I would probably get turned in, so if anyone turns me in, I'm going to know it was you. But I have, at any given time, 4 or 5 almost grown boys living in the same room in my house. We don't have the separation in my family that I had hoped for. I thought that, okay, I thought the kids were going to just grow up and go. And when they did,
They come back.
they came back. And we live in an environment right now that is aberrant in so many ways. And one of the things that I know that I have to do is I need to connect my mom, who also lives with us, and we have a dog. And I'm growing a garden. All right, so be that as it may.
Yeah.
The point is, we have to make those relationships however we can. I have my oldest, who lives in Washington, D.C., she FaceTimes my mom, just so that her kids can see my mom. Now, my mother is not a really interesting conversationalist all the time, and she doesn't hear really well, but they're putting a name and a face and a voice together. And she's asked my mother to tape record stories of her youth in 1927.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
You know, there weren't even airplanes then, I don't think. And so that family narrative, if you've got an estranged grandchild, put that down for them. I know now that I have to put things down for my grandchildren because, you know, I could walk out the door tomorrow and then they wouldn't know my voice, they wouldn't know all of these other things. Those family stories that you talked about, the family stories that everybody talked about, will ground everyone and bring you back to reality.
I don't need the microphone, but exactly what you're saying. The book's back there. Dr. Killinger wrote the book From Poppy with Love. His wife wrote the book, which changed my life that day. But it was called A Son is a Son Till He Gets a Wife, How Toxic Daughters-in-Law Destroy Families. And he wrote the book for her, which she was emotionally unable to do. I was emotionally unable to finish. From Poppy with Love is a story of a book of 40 letters that the grandfather wrote to the 2 grandchildren he will never see again and to the 2 he's never met. He is a minister. He's ministered around the world and an author of 60 books. And so those letters, if anyone's interested, those letters say your legacy. What would I tell you about this if I were with you?
Where did you come from?
Where did you come from?
That's
And
really important. It's
my
really important.
suggestion is that people, having read it, and of course it talks about AGA a lot too, but my suggestion is that whenever every alienated grandparent should have this, then write their own little story, attach it to that book, and leave it in their estate for the grandchildren.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea that you
It's the
can...
tradition of ethical wills.
Right.
You know, we think about willing our children money, resources, finances, but there's also, what are the values, what are the stories you want them to have? And I do that work with a lot of people who are thinking about where they are in life, and I think it's very powerful.
It's like, and that's the same with, it's the word and the handing on of the word. It's what we do as Catholics. It's handing on the history, handing on the story, handing on the thing that is so uniquely you that you may not know, but until you get, my dad killed himself when I was 18. I didn't know how to be a dad at 45. He wasn't 45. All right? I spent my late teens, and my early 20s figuring it out. And, God bless my father-in-law. Holy cow. He was the kind of man I wanted to grow up to be, but until I met him, I was just, you just don't realize that experiential handing on of the word, how really important that is. And if you could do it by letter, by video, by FaceTime, by a letter, letters are great. Handwrite letters to your grandchildren because they will cherish those. And they'll wind up framed somewhere or will always be in the box that the kid always takes wherever they're going.
Well, we just want to thank you all for coming out tonight. Especially we want to thank our panel. We really appreciate it. We hope that you learned.